-10 degrees. A homeless old man trembles, holding a sign. $5 for a mother dog and her puppies. Everyone walks past him, like silence is safer than compassion. The German Shepherd doesn't beg. She shields her pups and watches, waiting for the one who won't leave. Then a Navy SEAL stops and sees the same wounded loyalty he once knew in war. He doesn't buy them. He brings them home. And that single night changes everything. Because the old man's lost home wasn't lost. It was stolen, and the threat is closer than anyone thinks. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe for more True Heart stories. The town in the far north held its breath at -10 degrees, the kind of cold that felt clean and merciless at the same time. Winter sunlight cut across the streets in blinding sheets, so bright it made the snow hurt to look at, as if the ground itself were trying to remind anyone still walking that beauty could be sharp. The air burned on the first inhale. It burned again on the second. After that, the lungs learned to behave, or they didn't. Cade Weller moved through it with the economy of someone who had learned long ago how not to waste motion. At 40, he was tall and broad-shouldered, his build solid rather than showy, the kind that came from years of disciplined training carried forward into civilian life by habit rather than ambition. His hair was dark brown, cut in a neat undercut that never looked accidental, and his face, clean-shaven, angular with a strong jaw, held a stillness that could be mistaken for calm. His eyes were blue-gray, deep-set, always watching, and when they rested on the world, they did so with a careful distance, as if he were measuring it before deciding whether to step closer. Cade wore what he always wore when he left the house, a fitted, long-sleeved camouflage top and matching trousers in muted greens, the fabric standing cleanly at the knees and thighs like gear meant to work rather than impress. A dark tactical belt circled his waist, a pouch and a holster-shaped case riding at his hip. Familiar weight, familiar reassurance. Tan military boots, high at the ankle, crunched over packed snow. A heavy metal watch with a black face sat at his wrist, catching the sun when he turned just right. He moved through the small market square like a shadow that belonged there, nodding once to the coffee vendor he never bought from, ignoring the chatter that tried and failed to fill the cold. He was good at not being noticed. He had learned that skill long before the war ended for him, back when not being seen meant staying alive. He was almost past the square when something small and wrong interrupted the rhythm of his steps. It wasn't a sound, it was the absence of one. He slowed, then stopped, breath fogging white in front of him, and looked to his left. Near the edge of the square, where the sun couldn't quite reach and the snow lay dull and gray, an old man stood with his shoulders hunched against the cold. He was thin, his frame bent just enough to suggest years of weather and loss, and he wore a battered brown-gray parka that had been patched and repatched at the cuffs. Beneath it, a charcoal turtleneck showed through, frayed at the collar. His jeans were faded almost to white at the knees, and his boots, once leather, now cracked, were wrapped in strips of cloth for warmth. A knit cap sat low over thinning silver hair. His hands were bare, red and raw, trembling not with fear, but with the cold that seeps into bones and refuses to leave. At his feet sat a German Shepherd, black and tan, her body angled protectively around two small shapes pressed close to her belly. The mother dog did not bark. She did not whine. She did not pull at an invisible leash or perform desperation for passers-by. She simply stood there, still as a held breath, ears slightly back, eyes a warm amber that watched the world without flinching. The puppies, 3 or 4 months old at most, were huddled close, one rounder and brighter in color, the other darker and more reserved. The brighter one shifted and let out a small, indignant sound before settling again. The darker pressed closer to the mother, his nose tucked under her chest as if listening for something beneath the noise of the street. The old man held a piece of cardboard weighted with a small stone. On it, in uneven letters shaped by cold fingers, were 2 words and a symbol. $5. Cade stood there longer than he intended. He had seen begging before. He had seen it overseas and back home, in uniforms and out of them, in hands extended, and in eyes that learned to look past you. This was different. The old man wasn't asking. He was offering. When Cade met his gaze, the man lifted his chin slightly, a gesture that carried a strange, stubborn dignity. His eyes were pale, a washed-out gray blue, tired, but not empty. "I need a good person for them," the man said. His voice was rough, not from drink, but from weather and restraint. "That's all?" Cade looked down at the dogs again. The mother shifted her weight, placing herself more fully between the puppies and him. Not aggressive, just clear. He felt something in his chest tighten, a familiar sensation that had nothing to do with the cold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded bill, held it for a moment, then placed it gently on the cardboard. The old man's eyes flicked to it, then back up. "I'm not buying," Cade said, his voice low, steady. He pushed the bill back into the man's hand. "I'm inviting. One night. You and them. Warm. In the morning, you can go wherever you want." The old man stared at him, suspicion and hope crossing his face in quick succession. He looked down at the dogs, then back at Cade. The mother dog took a half-step forward, then stopped. She lifted her head and fixed Cade with that steady amber gaze, as if weighing him. Cade did not move. He had learned that sudden gestures broke trust faster than silence ever could. The dog held his eyes for a long second. Then she shifted back, pressing her side against the puppies again. It was not acceptance. It was permission to continue. The old man exhaled, a sound that carried more relief than he probably intended. "Walter Brine," he said after a moment, as if names mattered again. "And she's Mercy." He nodded toward the dog, almost apologetic. "They're all I've got." Cade nodded once. "Cade?" They did not shake hands. They did not need to. As they started toward the edge of town, the cold seemed to lean in closer, as if curious. Cade walked slightly ahead, matching his pace to Walter's shorter steps, without comment. The puppies stumbled over the uneven snow, the brighter one attempting to assert independence by pulling ahead before tumbling into a drift. Cade paused automatically, one hand half extended, before he caught himself and let Mercy handle it. She did, gently, a nudge of her muzzle, a quiet correction. The darker puppy, Nix, Cade would later learn, pressed his ear to the ground for a moment, then looked up, head tilted, as if the earth had told him something he couldn't yet share. They were a block from Cade's house when it happened, the small moment that shifted something unseen. A truck backfired on the main road, the sound sharp and sudden. Cade's shoulders locked, his breath stalled, heat flaring in his chest before the cold rushed back in. He did not stop walking. He had learned not to. Mercy did stop. She turned, placed herself sideways in front of the puppies, and waited. Not for the sound to fade, for Cade. Her eyes found his, steady and present. Cade forced air into his lungs, slow and counted, and the world widened again. The sound of traffic returned to its proper distance. Mercy watched him for another second, then turned back to the puppies and moved on. They reached the house without speaking. It was a modest place, set back from the road, lights off, the lake beyond it frozen into a pale, unbroken sheet. Cade unlocked the door and paused with his hand on the knob. He was not a man who believed in signs. He believed in choices. Still, he hesitated, aware of the weight of it, of how one open door could alter the shape of a night or a life. Then he turned the knob and stepped aside. Warm air spilled out, carrying the quiet hum of a heater and the faint scent of clean fabric and oil. Walter stood at the threshold, shoulders trembling now, not from fear, but from the sudden absence of pain. Mercy crossed first, careful and alert, then the puppies tumbled in. After her, Pip skidding slightly on the floor before regaining his dignity. Cade closed the door behind them, the sound soft but final. No one knew how long the night would last. Only that, without that door opening, there might not have been a morning at all. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound, the kind that marked a boundary rather than a welcome. Inside, the house held a careful warmth, not generous, but sufficient. Cade Weller stood for a moment with his back to the door, boots still on, letting the heater's steady hum replace the sharp silence of the street. The space was modest and deliberate. A narrow living room opened toward a small kitchen, every surface clear, every object placed with intention. There were no photographs on the walls, no decorations chosen for pleasure. What existed here existed because it served a purpose. It was the home of a man who relied on order the way others relied on prayer. Cade moved first, always first, habit as old as muscle memory. He shrugged off his camouflage jacket and hung it on the hook by the door, the motion precise. "You can sit there," he said, nodding toward the worn couch nearest the heater. His voice was even, neutral, the voice he used when he needed to keep the edges of himself from showing. Walter Brine hesitated before obeying, his thin frame folding carefully as he lowered himself down. Up close, the old man looked even more weathered than he had outside. Deep lines cut across his face, the kind carved by years of squinting into sun and wind, and his hands, now held close to the warmth, were cracked and swollen, the skin raw in places. He watched Cade with a quiet attentiveness, as if trying to understand the rules of this new, temporary world. Mercy did not approach the couch. She stepped just inside the room, then stopped, positioning herself squarely between Walter and the rest of the house. Her body formed a living barrier, calm but unmistakable. The puppies followed her lead. The lighter one, Pip, circled once, slid slightly on the floor, then curled against her flank with an indignant huff. The darker one, Nix, pressed in close, his head tucked beneath Mercy's chest, his breathing slow and measured, eyes half-lidded, but alert. Cade noticed the way Mercy's ears flicked at every sound, the way her gaze tracked him without accusation. She wasn't afraid of him. She was evaluating the environment, marking exits, listening for threats. It was not magic. It was practice. "I mean it," Cade said after a moment, turning back toward them. "Just one night. I'm not promising anything else." He needed to say it aloud, needed to hear the boundary in his own voice. Promises had weight. He had learned that the hard way. Walter nodded. "One night is more than we've had in a while," he replied. His voice carried a trace of dry humor, thin but intact. "We won't be trouble." He paused, then added, softer, "We're not dangerous." "I didn't say you were," Cade answered. He went to the kitchen, filled a kettle with water, and set it on the stove. The routine steadied him. He moved through the space like someone who knew exactly where the floorboards creaked, where not to step. When Hugh returned with 2 chipped mugs and a plate of bread and soup, warm just enough to count as a meal, Walter's shoulders eased by degrees. Mercy watched every movement, her tail still, her eyes following Cade's hands. They ate in near silence. Walter took small, careful bites, as if afraid the food might disappear if he moved too fast. Cade ate standing up, leaning against the counter, more out of habit than discomfort. The puppies ate last, Pip enthusiastically, Nix with a deliberate slowness that made Cade think of soldiers taught not to rush. Mercy waited until they were done before lowering her head to the bowl. When she did, she ate quietly, never lifting her eyes fully from the room. It was Walter who spoke first, setting his empty mug down with both hands. "I had a house once," he said, not looking at Cade, his gaze fixed on a point beyond the far wall. "In town, small place, nothing special, but it was mine." His mouth tightened briefly. Neighbor helped me when I got sick. Holt Granger, friendly enough, brought soup, offered to handle some paperwork. He shook his head, the movement slow. I trusted him, shouldn't have. Cade listened without comment, his face unreadable. He had heard versions of this story before, different names, same ending. "Do you have anything to prove it?" he asked finally. Walter's shoulders slumped. "Not on me. Papers were in the house. By the time I knew something was wrong, the locks were changed." He looked up then, meeting Cade's eyes. There was no plea there, only tired honesty. "I'm not asking you to fix it." "That's good," Cade replied, "because I'm not fixing anything." He meant it. He had learned what happened when he tried to carry other people's losses. They piled up fast. Outside, a car passed on the road, tires hissing over ice. Mercy rose at once, her body tensing, ears forward. Cade inhaled slowly, deliberately, and let it out. The dog watched him, then lowered. Herself back down, her weight settling over the puppies like a blanket. Cade noticed the exchange, filed it away without comment. The evening stretched. Walter's eyelids grew heavy, the warmth finally breaking through exhaustion. Cade brought out an old blanket and draped it over the old man's shoulders, careful not to startle him. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said quietly. "I'll be in the chair." He gestured to the armchair near the window, already claimed by his folded jacket. The lights dimmed. Outside, the frozen lake reflected moonlight like a sheet of glass. Inside, the house held its breath. Cade sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely, eyes open. Sleep did not come easily to him. It rarely did. He listened to the rhythm of the heater, the soft sounds of breathing from the couch. His chest tightened briefly, a familiar ache flaring and fading. He counted his breaths until it passed. It was then, somewhere past the middle of the night, that the rehook came, quiet and unsettling. Mercy rose without sound and moved away from the couch, her steps deliberate. She crossed the room and stopped directly in front of Cade, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. She sat straight-backed and lifted her head until her eyes were level with his. She did not growl, she did not whine. She simply looked at him, unwavering, as if anchoring him to the present. Cade felt the room narrow, then steady. His heartbeat slowed. Whatever had stirred in him retreated. After a long moment, Mercy turned and returned to her place beside the puppies, curling around them once more. Cade remained still, shaken by the simplicity of it. He had not asked for help. He had not known he needed it. The dog had decided otherwise. The rest of the night passed without incident. Dawn crept in, pale and tentative, light spilling across the snow in thin bands. Cade rose before the others, as he always did. He stood by the window, watching the world come back into focus. The town looked harmless in daylight, ordinary. He knew better. Behind him, Walter slept on, one hand curled into the blanket. Mercy lay awake, eyes open, tracking Cade's reflection in the glass. The puppies breathed in unison, small and steady. Cade did not wake them. He sat back down in the chair and waited, the weight of the night settling over him. He understood something now that he hadn't the evening before. There were lives in his living room that did not know where they would be tomorrow. He did not know what he would do about that. He only knew he was awake, and the light was on. Morning arrived thin and pale, the kind of light that felt hesitant after a hard night. The frozen lake beyond Cade Weller's house reflected the sky like a sheet of dull steel, and the town looked smaller in daylight, ordinary enough to hide its sharper edges. Cade drove with both hands on the wheel, posture straight, eyes scanning the road out of habit. Walter Brine sat in the passenger seat, bundled in the same worn parka, his knees angled inward to make room for Mercy, who rode low between the seats with the puppies tucked close behind. Pip watched the world flash by with open-mouthed wonder. Nix lay still, chin resting on Mercy's foreleg, eyes half closed, but attentive. Cade had not invited conversation. Walter did not force it. The silence felt earned. They stopped first at the church because it was open early, and because people talked there when they wouldn't talk anywhere else. The building was modest, white clapboard, narrow windows fogged from heat, and smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Inside, the caretaker, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile and flour on her hands, nodded at Walter with a recognition that surprised Cade. She did not ask why he was there. She asked only if he was warm. Mercy waited by the door, posture relaxed but alert, her tail still. Cade noticed how people adjusted their steps around her without realizing it, as if the room itself had learned to give her space. Walter spoke to a clerk who kept old donation records, then to a volunteer who remembered him bringing bread on Sundays years ago. The details came slowly, fragments laid side by side. A name here, a date there. Cade listened, saying little, his mind assembling timelines the way it always had, looking for the places where edges didn't meet. When they left, he didn't tell Walter what he was thinking. He drove instead to the town hall, a squat brick building that looked like it had been designed to discourage lingering. The clerk behind the counter was efficient and impersonal, glasses perched low on her nose, fingers moving quickly across a keyboard. She pulled property records without comment. Cade leaned on the counter, weight balanced, eyes following the cursor on the screen. The dates appeared neat and official, but something about them felt wrong. Transfers clustered too close together. Signatures recorded on days when Walter, by his own account, had been sick enough to struggle with stairs. Cade asked a few neutral questions. The clerk answered what she could, then shrugged. "That's what's on file," she said, already reaching for the next task. Outside, the cold snapped back into place. Walter's breath came shallow. Cade handed him a coffee without ceremony. "I'm not here to take anything back," Walter said quietly, as if preempting an accusation. "Just wanted to know if I was remembering it wrong." Cade shook his head once. "Memory isn't the problem," he said. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to yet. It was on the steps of the town hall that they met Deputy Mara Quinn. She stood off to one side, posture easy but watchful, a paper cup warming her hands. She was in her early 30s, medium height, with a compact athletic build that suggested she spent her free time moving rather than talking about it. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a low tie, practical and unadorned, and her face, freckled lightly across the nose, held a steady intelligence. Her eyes, a deep, unflinching brown, took in details quickly and held on to them. She wore a navy winter jacket with the county patch on the sleeve, black tactical pants, boots scuffed from use, and a radio clipped neatly at her shoulder. When she spoke, her voice was calm and direct, the kind that asked questions without trying to trap the answers. "Morning," she said, nodding once to Cade, then to Walter. Her gaze flicked briefly to Mercy, then to the puppies, assessing. "Everything all right?" "We're checking records," Cade replied. He did not volunteer more. He had learned that explanations could close doors faster than silence. Mara studied him for a second longer than necessary, her attention snagging on the way he stood, the belt at his waist, the boots. "You from out of town?" she asked. "Here," Cade said. Just quiet. She accepted that with a small lift of her chin. "If you find something that doesn't make sense, bring it by," she said. "Paperwork can be clean and still be wrong." Then, almost as an afterthought, "And keep the dogs leashed near Maine. People get jumpy." Mercy did not move. She watched Mara with open interest, no tension in her body. When Mara stepped closer, Mercy lowered her head slightly, a subtle sign of acknowledgement. Mara noticed. A corner of her mouth lifted. "She's trained," she said. "No," Cade replied. "She's learned." They were halfway down the block when Holt Granger appeared, as if summoned. By the name. He emerged from a black SUV parked near the curb, tall and broad through the shoulders, wearing a charcoal wool coat that fell neatly to his knees. His hair was dark with a careful streak of gray at the temples, combed back with precision. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed, his smile smooth, his eyes pale and calculating. "Walter," he said warmly. "Didn't expect to see you in town." Walter stiffened. Mercy rose at once, placing herself squarely in front of him. She did not bark. She did not bare her teeth. Her ears came forward, her muscles tightening, a quiet warning written in her stance. Cade felt the shift immediately. "Holt?" Walter replied, voice thin. Holt's gaze slid to Cade, lingering on his face, his belt, his boots. "Friend of yours?" he asked, tone polite. "Just making sure things add up," Cade said. Holt chuckled softly. "They usually do." He glanced down at Mercy. "Careful with that one. People talk?" Mercy did not move. Her eyes stayed on Holt, unblinking. Cade filed the reaction away, another piece in a growing pattern. They left without further exchange. Cade did not tell Walter what he was thinking. He told him only, "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." He meant it. He was not a lawyer. He was not a savior. He was a man who knew how to survive and how to notice when something was off. The day passed without answers. By evening the cold had sharpened again. Back at the house, Walter settled into the couch, coughing intermittently, his chest rattling with each breath. Cade brought him water, checked the thermostat, and sat back down without comment. Mercy hovered, attentive. When the coughing worsened, she moved closer, placing her head gently on Walter's knee, her weight steady and grounding. She stayed like that until the spasm passed, her presence doing what words could not. Cade watched from his chair, something loosening in his chest. Later, as darkness settled in, Cade stood at the window, looking out over the lake. He felt the familiar pull to step away, to keep his distance while he still could. He hadn't promised anything. He didn't have to, but he also knew what he'd seen. The dates that didn't line up, the look in Holt Granger's eyes, the way Mercy had placed herself between a man and a threat without instruction or reward. Behind him, Walter slept fitfully. Mercy curled at his side, the puppies breathing in quiet rhythm. Cade did not make a decision. He didn't need to. He understood something simpler and heavier at the same time. He hadn't agreed to help, but he couldn't pretend he hadn't noticed. And once you noticed, turning away was a choice too. The notice arrived folded once and slid beneath the door like an accusation that knew how to whisper. Cade found it when he came back from splitting kindling at the edge of the yard, his breath steaming in the sharp air. The paper was thin, official, stamped with a county seal that meant time would now move according to someone else's clock. Animal control inspection. Complaint filed regarding aggressive, unregistered dogs. Winter safety provisions invoked. Cade read it once, then again, his jaw tightening, not with anger, but with recognition. Pressure rarely announced itself with raised voices. It arrived with forms. Walter sat at the table, shoulders hunched inside his coat, hands cupped around a mug. Mercy lay between the table and the stove, body angled to cover the puppies, Pip gnawing the edge of a towel, Nix watching the door with solemn focus. Cade set the paper down where Walter could see it without handing it to him. "He moved," Cade said. Walter nodded as if he had expected nothing else. The law, Cade learned quickly, had teeth sharpened by seasons. Winter ordinances allowed faster action under the banner of public safety, especially where animals were concerned. Cade drove into town again, this time not to listen, but to comply. He registered temporary residence for Walter, signed as host. He filled out foster paperwork at the county office, the pen feeling too light in his hand. At the veterinary clinic, he paid for exams and vaccinations he had not budgeted for, counting silently while Mercy endured the table with stoic patience. The veterinarian, Dr. Ellen Price, A tall woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair braided neatly down her back and hands that moved with practiced gentleness, checked Mercy's joints, listened to her heart, murmured approval. "Protective," she said, watching Mercy's eyes track every movement. "Not aggressive." Cade nodded. He didn't explain the difference. He trusted the woman could see it. As Cade loaded the truck outside the clinic, a siren wailed somewhere beyond the square, then cut off abruptly. Mercy froze mid-step, ears lifting, body still as carved wood. The puppies pressed closer. Cade felt the old reflex rise, the narrowing, the need to catalog exits. But it passed. Mercy exhaled, slow, and relaxed only when the sound didn't return. Cade stared at her, a beat too long. He realized then she wasn't reacting to fear. She was measuring threat and release, teaching him the difference again without words. Deputy Mara Quinn met him outside the station later that afternoon, coat unzipped, breath fogging the air. She held a folder against her chest, hair escaping its tie in the wind. "You did the right thing," she said, glancing at the paperwork. "Temporary foster buys time." Her eyes flicked to the lake road, to the distant line of dark trees. "Time's what he hates losing." "Holt," Cade said. Mara nodded. "He's been buying quiet, small parcels. Shoreline access, folks who don't have lawyers." She hesitated, then added, "Walter's not the only one." Back home, the visit from Animal Control came before dusk. 2 officers stepped inside, boots squeaking on the mat, clipboards held like shields. They were polite, distant. Mercy rose and placed herself between them and Walter without a sound. Cade spoke calmly, pointing out tags, receipts, the vet's signature. The officers made notes. One of them, a young man with red cheeks and a nervous habit of tapping his pen, met Cade's eyes and softened. "Looks in order," he said. "We'll note compliance." When they left, the door clicked shut with a finality that echoed longer than it should have. Night pressed in. The lake went black. Cade sat at the table, papers spread in careful rows, thinking of deserts where operations failed, not because of bullets, but because someone signed the wrong page. Mercy paced once, twice, then lay down at his feet, her weight, grounding. Walter watched the stove flame, quiet. "I don't need my house back," he said suddenly. "I just need to know I wasn't erased." Cade folded the papers and met his eyes. "I can't promise a win," he said. The words tasted honest. "But I promise you won't disappear." Mercy lifted her head, as if punctuating the vow, and the puppies settled, breathing in unison. Outside, the wind worried the trees. Inside, the choice had been made, not loudly, not heroically, but with ink and warmth and the refusal to look away. Evidence did not announce itself the way people expected it to. It didn't glitter beneath footprints or surface with a confession. It arrived quietly, in drawers that hadn't been opened in years, in voices that had learned to keep their stories brief, in dates that leaned too close together to be coincidence. Cade learned that truth, like winter, settled in layers. The first lead came from the tax office's basement, a low-ceilinged room that smelled of dust and old paper. A clerk directed Cade and Deputy Mara Quinn down a narrow stairwell without ceremony. The clerk was a thin man with a permanent stoop and a cardigan frayed at the cuffs, the kind of person who had learned to stay invisible. "Box 17, he said, pointing. "Lake parcels, pre-digital." Cade thanked him and got to work. He moved slowly, methodically, hands careful, eyes alert. Receipts, assessments, marginal notes written in ink that had faded to the color of weak tea. Mara watched the timeline, assemble, her expression tightening. Transfers initiated before approvals. Penalties waived without explanation. A pattern that didn't need shouting to be heard. They found the notary next, retired and living alone in a modest ranch house near the Pines. Her name was Ruth Calder, late 70s, tall even with age bending her spine, hair a soft white cloud pulled into a low bun. Her skin was pale and thin, veins tracing blue maps across her hands. She moved with deliberation, as if each step had to be negotiated, but her eyes were sharp, amused by the world's shortcuts. "People think a stamp makes things true," she said, pouring tea. "It just makes them official." She remembered Walter. She remembered the week he'd been sick. She remembered signatures brought to her by someone else. She remembered refusing once. "Then they came back," she said, voice even, "with different papers." Cade didn't interrupt. He never did when the truth was finding its way out. He asked for dates. Ruth provided them. He asked for names. She gave what she could, including Holt Granger's. Mara wrote everything down, the scrape of her pen loud in the quiet room. The pressure returned as a look before it returned as words. Holt began appearing where Walter did not want him, outside the grocery store, near the church steps, always smiling, always careful. "Town's changing," he said once, eyes sliding to Cade's boots. "Hard to keep up." Walter stopped attending Sunday mornings. People who had once nodded now looked away. Cade noticed. He always noticed. At home, the tension hummed like a wire pulled too tight. Cade practiced patience the way he practiced breathing, steady and deliberate. Mercy sensed the strain. She watched Holt from a distance once when his SUV idled at the road's edge, her body taut, ears forward. Cade knelt and placed a hand at her shoulder, grounding himself so she could ground too. "Easy," he murmured. She eased, though her eyes never left the vehicle. Cade understood the risk. One wrong moment, and the word aggressive would be written where protective belonged. Cade was copying dates into a notebook when Mercy rose suddenly and moved to the window, head cocked, listening. Not to the road, not to the yard, to something inside the house. Pip tumbled over his own paws, chasing Nick's, skidding into the table leg with a comic thump that broke the spell for a second. Cade smiled despite himself. Then he heard it, the soft creak of the back porch, not from weight, but from cold contracting wood. Mercy's hackles did not rise. Instead, she sat, calm, eyes fixed on the door. Cade realized she was telling him not danger, but timing. He waited. The sound passed. Later Mara called. "Holt filed a motion to accelerate," she said. "We're close." The days blurred. Cade wasn't a lawyer. He never pretended to be. He brought order. He built a clean line through mess. He cross-checked dates with weather reports, hospital logs, snow closures, anything that placed bodies where signatures claimed they were. Walter coughed less. He ate more. He began telling stories he hadn't told in years, about a garden by the lake, about a chair he'd fixed and fixed again. The puppies grew bold, turning tension into slapstick with clumsy sprints and mismatched barks. Once Nick slipped on the kitchen rug and landed on his back, stunned, then sneezed as if embarrassed. Even Mercy's mouth softened, the corner lifting for a heartbeat. Cade felt the house breathe. Mara brought the update at dusk, boots ringing on the porch. She looked tired but steady, hair escaping its tie again. "We have enough to freeze the transactions," she said, voice low. "Not enough to end it." Cade nodded. He had known the shape of that sentence before it arrived. Outside, the lake reflected the first stars. Inside, Mercy settled between Walter and the door, the puppies asleep against her warmth. The truth hadn't fallen from the sky. It had been gathered piece by patient piece, and it was finally heavy enough to matter. The hearing room was smaller than Cade expected, a municipal space built for zoning disputes and snow removal arguments, not for the quiet reckoning of a man's life. The walls were a washed-out beige, the lights too bright, the air warmed by old radiators that hissed and clicked like they were remembering winters from decades ago. Cade took a seat along the back wall, posture straight, hands resting loosely on his thighs. Walter sat at the front, shoulders hunched in a borrowed jacket, Mercy at his feet, as if she'd always known where she belonged. The puppies were not allowed inside. They waited in the truck with the windows cracked and blankets tucked tight, watched over by a volunteer from the shelter, an elderly man with a soft voice and a wool cap pulled low, content to rock gently and hum to himself. The clerk called the case with a practiced cadence. Holt Granger entered last, coat immaculate, hair combed back to the same careful line Kate had seen before. He took his seat, with a smile that suggested patience, the kind that assumed time would eventually agree with him. His attorney sat beside him, a tall man in his 40s with a narrow face and a neatly trimmed beard, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. He wore a charcoal suit and spoke in measured tones, confidence shaped by repetition rather than conviction. When he stood, his hands moved with economical precision, palms open as if offering reason itself. Deputy Mara Quinn sat 2 rows behind Walter, notebook balanced on her knee. She looked different without the jacket, gray sweater, sleeves pushed up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Her hair was pulled back, as always, but there was a looseness to her posture now, a sense that the work had carried her here rather than the other way around. When she met Cade's eyes, she gave the smallest nod. Not reassurance, recognition. The judge entered, a woman in her late 50s with close-cropped silver hair and glasses perched low on her nose. Her face held the calm authority of someone who had learned to separate urgency from importance. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was with an economy that made every word count. The facts came out in pieces: dates, transfers, waivers. Cade watched the judge's pen pause at the same places his own mind had paused weeks earlier. Holt's attorney argued process, argued intent, argued inevitability. He spoke of development and opportunity, of compliance and consent. Walter was asked to stand. He did so slowly, hands trembling not with fear, but with effort. He told his story without flourish, voice thin but steady. He did not ask for sympathy. He asked to be recognized. When the judge addressed him by name, Mr. Brine. Walter's shoulders shook. The sound that escaped him was small, broken, and unmistakable. He did not cry because he was winning. He cried because he had been called back into the room. Mercy lay still the entire time, chin on her paws, eyes open and watchful. She did not move when voices rose. She did not tense when Holt shifted in his chair. Her presence seemed to slow the room, to remind it of weight and breath. A woman in the second row leaned forward, as if steadied by the sight. The judge glanced down once, briefly, then continued. The ruling was narrow and precise. Holt's right to transact further property around the lake was suspended pending investigation. A temporary residency order was granted to Walter, protecting him from displacement. The inquiry widened to include patterns of coercion and irregular notarization. Not victory. Movement. When the gavel came down, it did not sound like an ending. It sounded like a door unlocked. Holt passed close enough that Cade could smell his cologne, clean, expensive, meant to project certainty. Holt leaned in, voice low. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said. Cade did not respond. Mercy lifted her head and met Holt's gaze, calm and unwavering. Holt's smile faltered, just a fraction, before he straightened and walked on. Mara saw it. She wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. Outside, the cold snapped them awake. Snow squeaked underfoot. Reporters had not come. The town saved its curiosity for warmer days. Walter stood on the steps, blinking into the light, as if expecting the ground to shift beneath him. Cade placed a steadying hand at his elbow, then let go. He had learned when to hold and when to trust the balance that came back on its own. They drove home in silence. The lake reflected the sky in pale bands. At the house, the puppies tumbled out of the truck, clumsy and delighted, skidding across the packed snow. One barked at his own shadow and startled himself. The other tried to pounce and slid belly first, coming to rest against Cade's boot. He laughed before he could stop himself, a short sound that surprised them all. Walter watched with something like wonder. That evening, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but steadier. Cade cooked a simple meal, stretching what he had the way he always did. Walter ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it might disappear if he hurried. Mercy rested near the stove, the puppies asleep against her warmth. Cade sat back with his coffee and watched the room breathe. He thought of missions that ended with debriefs and exits, with clear lines drawn between then and now. This had no such line. The work was only beginning. Later, when the wind rose and the lake groaned softly beneath its skin of ice, Cade stood at the window and let the quiet settle. He realized he had stayed longer than planned. He realized, too, that the thought of leaving no longer brought relief. Responsibility, he understood, was not a chain. It was a direction. Mercy came to his side, leaning just enough to be felt. Cade rested his hand at her shoulder. Outside, the night held. Inside, something durable had begun. Spring did not arrive all at once in the north. It came in negotiations, thin sunlight testing the edges of ice, the lake loosening its grip with low echoing cracks, the town relearning color, one cautious shade at a time. Cade Weller noticed the changes the way he noticed everything else now, without rush, without expectation. The house by the lake stood the same, spare and ordered, but it breathed differently. It had learned new rhythms. Walter Brine made the first decision quietly, the way he did everything that mattered. He stood at the window one morning, shoulders wrapped in a sweater Cade had found at the back of a closet, watching Mercy lead the puppies through a clumsy patrol of the yard. "I don't want to live alone anymore," he said, not turning around. His voice was steady. The words did not ask permission. Cade nodded once. The house did not object. They began small. A chair added by the door, a second kettle, names written on a paper taped to the fridge, times, for soup, for walks, for the clinic van that came twice a week. People arrived with caution and left with less of it. An older woman with silver curls and a laugh that startled even herself brought bread and stayed to sit. A man with a veteran's posture, straight spine, tired eyes, stood in the doorway until Mercy rested her head against his knee and the words he had practiced fell away. The house did not become loud. It became steady. Cade never called it a project. He called it Tuesday. The sign on the mailbox came later, carved by a neighbor who had more hands than friends. Northlight Watch. It was not an organization. It was a habit. People sat together without explaining the weight they carried. Animals slept where they chose. No one asked what anyone had been before. Mercy changed and didn't. Her coat thickened and shone. The stiffness in her step eased with warmth and time. She remained watchful, choosing corners that offered lines of sight, moving between people when voices rose, placing her body where calm was needed. Pip grew bold and earnest, a russet streak of confidence who announced himself to the world with mismatched barks. Nix learned patience early, a quiet observer with a thoughtful gaze, content to lean and listen. Cade watched them choose him back, again and again, not with spectacle, but with presence. When the paperwork came through, he signed without ceremony. He did not feel like a rescuer. He felt selected. The wind rose suddenly, rattling the porch rail, sending a sharp report through the house. Cade woke as he always did, too fast, heart already moving. He sat up, breath shallow. Mercy was there before the second thought, not climbing, not crowding, simply placing herself within sight. She did not touch him. She breathed. The puppies stirred, then settled. Across the room, Walter coughed once and slept on. The storm passed without incident, but Cade remained awake, steadying, realizing the difference between vigilance and fear. He did not count breaths. He followed Mercy's. Morning came soft and gray. Cade made coffee and found Walter at the table, hands folded around a mug. "You stay," Walter said, as if confirming a weather report. Cade smiled, small. "I know." The town noticed eventually, not with banners or apologies, but with changed habits. People who had crossed the street stopped crossing. The clerk at the tax office brought extra folders and stayed to listen. Deputy Mara Quinn came by on her days off, hair loose, jacket traded for a sweater, her laugh easier now that she wasn't carrying the case alone. She never said she was proud. She didn't need to. When she left, she scratched Mercy behind the ear and nodded to Cade. Recognition. Cade still had nights that stretched. He did not pretend otherwise. He woke sometimes with the echo of orders in his ears, with the sense that something had gone wrong far away and he should have known. But now, when he sat up, there were eyes in the dark. That met his without judgment. There was weight against his shin. There was a house that did not demand explanations. Walter found his voice in small places. He fixed a chair and fixed it again, just because he could. He taught Pip how to wait at thresholds. He told stories by the stove, not to be believed or corrected, just to be heard. When he laughed, it surprised him every time. Northlight Watch did not save the town. It did not need to. It made a table where people could sit. It made a practice of staying. Cade watched the lake open fully, watched the ice surrender without drama, and felt something like completion that did not ask for applause. On the last cold evening of the season, Cade stood on the porch with Mercy at his side, the puppies wrestling at their feet, Walter inside, humming off-key. The stars came out one by one. Cade thought of the question fate had been asking since the first $5 changed hands. He had answered it without speeches, with soup and signatures and patience. Sometimes destiny does not arrive to rescue anyone at all. It arrives to ask a quieter thing, "Will you stay?" This time, Cade stayed. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder in the sky or a sudden door swinging open in the right direction. Sometimes God answers in quieter ways. A hand that chooses to stay. A warm room offered on the coldest night. A loyal animal who keeps watch when a human heart forgets how to rest. In everyday life, it can look almost ordinary. Making an extra bowl of soup. Calling someone you have not checked on in too long. Listening without trying to fix everything. Giving kindness when no one is applauding. But heaven has always loved small faithfulness. What looks like just one good decision can become the beginning of someone's rescue, including your own. If this story stirred something in you, let it become more than a feeling that fades. Share it with someone who might be carrying a quiet winter inside. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or tell us about a moment when kindness found you when you least expected it. And if you want more stories of loyalty, redemption, and the kind of courage that shows up in daily life, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. May God watch over you and your home. May He place peace in your mind when the nights run long, strength in your body when the days feel heavy, and loving people at your door when you need them most. Wherever you are, may you never walk alone.